the
record
English language,
and
everyone.
Yeah.
record and record.
Anyways, last week, Jay's here. Hey, Jay.
Jay, you're just
Well, maybe
in
you wouldn't
time.
make it.
Right here.
We do have quite a bit to go over, so let's go ahead and start. Last week we watched Paths of Glory, so today we're talking about that film and the director who filmed it, Stanley Kubrick. Stanley Kubrick is one of the greatest filmmakers who ever lived.
Agree.
And we will be talking about his early film work, the first feature films that he directed, up until Paths of Glory, and we'll touch on a little bit of what he did after at the end. But Stanley Kubrick was born in Brooklyn, New York, July 26, 1928, to Jewish immigrant parents, Jacob and Sadie Kubrick. He was an avid chess player, loved chess his entire life. Some of his films would be very informed by chess. We see a little bit of chess, like in Paths of Glory, but never very strongly. But he would literally, there was a time, yes, are you raising your hand?
Where's Q York at?
New York?
Q York.
Q York? Yeah, Q York, thank you for pointing out. I was writing this at like 2 o'clock in the morning. Don't get off my case. Stanley Kubrick was born in Q York, avid chess player. He literally, there was a period of his life where he was on welfare because he was putting all of his money towards making films, and to live, he would play chess in Central Park and bet on his chess matches, and that's how he would get money to eat for the day. He'd get, a couple of nickels.
That's
It was
impressive
the
because
50s.
that's cutthroat.
Yeah, he was an insane chess player. But as a teenager, he was given his first camera, and he quickly developed an affinity and skill for photography. He, learned lenses, film processing, all that great stuff. And by 17 years old, in 1945, he became an apprentice photographer for Look magazine. Look magazine was this very prestigious fashion, but they did other things like Vogue or Vanity Fair. This very prestigious magazine in New York City. This is Walter Cartier, a boxer that Kubrick did a photo shoot for, photo spread, took several pictures of him. But he started there as an apprentice photographer in 1945, and 1 year later would be hired on as a professional photographer for Look magazine at 18 years old. We can see a lot of Kubrick's later interests in a lot of his earlier photography. Architecture, the chateau in Paths of Glory, the way that he focuses upon architecture was something that really interested Kubrick. We see that in his early photography. The bourgeoisie, the upper class, the differentiation between the upper class and the lower class was something that really interested Kubrick. We see that again in his early photography here. These rich people on another theme that Kubrick would explore frequently was man's relationship with technology. And so we see both of those themes explored in this image, where we see these rich people on the subway created for common people. Kubrick liked to play around in that realm with those ideas. That's him at a really young age working as a photographer. While he was working as a photographer for Look magazine, he started watching films prolifically. He watched anything and everything he could get his hands on. He went to the theater, went there, stayed there the whole day. A couple of notable directors that he would watch at in this early age were Max Ophuls, who is this French director. Y'all wouldn't really know anything that he did. But also Elia Kazan, who would go on to make things like On the Waterfront, Streetcar Named Desire. Both of those are some of the greatest films ever created. Kubrick was a big fan of his. But it wasn't long before Kubrick wanted to move beyond still pictures. Still pictures weren't enough for him. He wanted to start making movies. So he scraped some money together and made Day of the Fight. This is Kubrick's very first work of film. Just the same way that we have commercials before movies. You go to the movies and you get, these big long commercials advertising upcoming TV shows and stuff like that. You would get a reel like that at the beginning of films back then, but in this day and age, whenever nobody had TVs, hardly anybody had a TV, you got your news at the movies, and so they would play news stories. And in between those news stories, they would have these public interest pieces like Day of the Fight. Day of the Fight follows Walter Cartier, the subject of one of Kubrick's earlier Look magazine photo shoots. We saw that picture of him. On the day of a big fight, it focuses on what he does all day, like what he eats for breakfast, how many times he eats that day, him brushing his teeth, stuff like that. The waiting, for the fight is a big deal that Kubrick really focuses on. It cost Kubrick $3,900 of his own money to buy film, gear, and film processing chemicals, and RKO bought the film for $4,000, which means that Kubrick made a grand total profit of $100.
Which was a lot of money back then.
It was a lot of money back then, but $3,900 was a lot of money back then as well.
Yeah.
But the money wasn't super important. Wasn't nearly as important as the fact that this film established Kubrick as a filmmaker. People started understanding that the Stanley Kubrick guy, he wants to make movies. This is but just the lighting, the photography.
No one ever told Walter to be a fighter.
It's real information.
His family was against it, but he just had the feeling for it. On this day, the people around him feel the pain and fear. But for Walter, the bad part is the waiting for the thing to happen. Soon it's coming. He'll be glad when it's finally here.
Yeah, it focuses on the waiting a lot. We see Kubrick's early photography experience coming in handy here. He shot this fight live. This is the big climax to Day of the Fight. And already this deep focus photography, image with this dark foreground and bright background, at a central point of focus, is something that he's already creating really, really interesting images here. But the photography is just absolutely gorgeous. The way that it's lit is very much like an old film noir, old detective movies, high contrast photography. A lot of it echoes, when it doesn't echo, it proceeds. A lot of it looks a lot like what filmmakers like Martin Scorsese making Raging Bull later on with film, and this preceded all that by 20 years. But yeah, he made Day of the Fight. He started continued to make these short informational pieces. The next one that he made was Flying Padre. It's about a priest whose parish is so large that he has to use a plane to get around. Again, this theme of man's relationship to technology was something that Kubrick was interested in. Whereas Day of the Fight was filmed like a film noir, Flying Padre is much more Western. It's got this wide open, soft lighting.
The ambulance is waiting. The hospital is only minutes away.
It doesn't speak. He doesn't film long with sound. He doesn't record sound.
There's no brass.
It's just all narration. It's information. It's like a documentary.
No newspapermen clamoring for a headline. Just an ambulance.
Anyways, it's Sick Baby. But so after he makes Day of the Fight, Flying Padre, then he makes the Seafarers for the Seafarers International Union. They wanted him to make this informational, showing people who we are, what we do, what we're about. So he made this big long thing, and like I said, it's all very dry and informational. But we do see this, and it should look familiar to you. This one shot.
Headquarters has to begin where others leave off.
Like I
For
said, really
seafarers coming
informational.
ashore in a port away from home, it ought to be and is a second home, where no man off a ship is a stranger to the rest, and where the things he needs are close at hand. Like this SIU cafeteria, open to the public, but mainly for the convenience of seafarers.
If this shot looks familiar, it's because we saw it in Paths of Glory. It's called a lateral tracking shot, and it's one of Kubrick's favorite shots ever. I mean, he uses it multiple times in every single film. He uses it over and over and over. He uses it here in Paths of Glory. He'll use it again in Full Metal Jacket, again in Killer's Kiss, again in The Shining, over and over and over. He uses this lateral tracking shot. It's one of his favorites. Aside from the actual tracking shot, one-point perspective following in front of or behind somebody. He likes this tracking shot, this lateral tracking shot as well. But all of what Stanley Kubrick had created so far was informational. It was following other people's stories. Stanley wanted to craft stories himself, not just tell other people's stories. So he made Day of the Fight, Flying Padre, and after Flying Padre, technically he made his first feature film before The Seafarers, but it fits better, whenever we're talking about it. He made 3 informational shorts, 3 feature films, then Paths of Glory. But technically Fear and Desire is before Seafarers. So he made Day of the Fight, Flying Padre, Seafarers, and then he made his very first feature film. This is him on set of Fear and Desire.
That's the first time I've ever seen him smile.
Yeah, he doesn't smile very often. His very first film, feature film, is this movie called Fear and Desire. Kubrick quit his job at Look magazine after 7 years there to focus completely on the film. His father cashed in his life insurance policy, and Kubrick borrowed money from his uncle to finance the film's $13,000 budget. That's $120,000 today. Making movies is not cheap, especially whenever you're shooting on film. He literally worked with 6 actors, his wife as script supervisor, and 4 Mexican day laborers. Drove through Home Depot and was like, hey, you want to make a movie? That's all Kubrick had. He did all the other work himself. He edited the entire movie, he lit the entire movie, he directed the entire movie, he placed every camera, he moved every piece of gear, he cut every frame himself. He did everything himself. The film is a war movie, and it follows a squad of troops who crash land behind enemy lines and must find a way to escape. The film, it's much more commercially oriented. Kubrick really wanted to, not pander, but reach a wider audience. He's trying to make money off of this movie. And so it's filmed like a war movie, just a typical war movie, but it does have some interesting philosophical focuses. It focuses lightly in a couple of areas on man's inherent violent tendencies and the blurred lines differentiating sex and violence. We see that in the title itself, Fear and Desire. The film questions what informs our baser instincts. Does sex inform violence, or does violence inform sex? And so the blurred line between, they're so different but so interestingly similar at the same time, and that theme is something that Kubrick would be interested in for his entire life. Literally, his last film talks about it very greatly. And so his very first film and his very last film explore these themes. It was something that really interested Kubrick. But, like I said, it was mainly a war movie. This interestingly illustrates, it was a war movie, and Kubrick hated it. Kubrick absolutely hated
Fear
it.
and Desire.
Yes, he burned all the negatives, tried to get rid of every copy there was, and for a long time people called it Kubrick's lost film because nobody had seen it. He had so effectively gotten rid of it. But after he died, people found a reel somewhere in some forgotten library and copied it. And so he would be turning over in his grave if he knew that you were watching this. But this is a scene from Fear and Desire, and it does have some... The film is not that great. It's got some weird stuff in it, but it does have some really interesting moments like this one. This is a scene from Fear and Desire.
Better hurry. There may be others around.
I'm going to get some of that stew first.
Sidney, better grab something to eat. Maybe a long time till our next feast. You better eat something.
How's the stew, Mac?
Kind of cold. Cold stew's all right.
Cold stew on a blazing island. We've just made a perfect definition of war, Mac.
That's ducky.
Of course, a blazing island.
So yeah, it's interesting to watch Kubrick make this allegorical kind of analogy that the stew is blood and guts and violence. You know, whenever in a time in a day and age whenever he couldn't really show those things directly, the stew becomes allegorical of that, and then literally they drink and eat the blood of their enemies. It glorifies this inherent, very violent, overly violent tendency. Here, the actions that they have to take to escape the island, the people that they have to kill, starts driving this private Sydney mad, and it's terribly overacted. But in this scene, we see Kubrick trying to talk about that line again, that blurred line. Yeah, this woman is a native girl. They captured her. She stumbled upon them, but she would go and tell the enemy. So they tied her up so that she wouldn't go. And now she's seducing Private Sydney so that he'll untie her and she can escape.
I'll get you loose. Just a minute. You put your arms around me. I know. Wait. Think you'd like me? Just a minute. Don't make me stay. You're going to tell the general. You're going to tell him I'm in front of him. Come back. Don't tell the general. I won't hurt you.
And in the end, he assumes the same position that she does. Something dies in Private Sydney whenever he has to kill her, and we see this kind of desire pushing him towards this violence. And we it's explored in a couple of other key elements of in a couple of other key parts of the film. But are man's violent tendencies driven by sexual frustration, or is an overactive sex drive motivated by our violent tendencies? The distinction between those very opposite ideas, but so similar, was something that fascinated Kubrick even from this very early time, making his very first feature film, Fear and Desire. His next feature film would explore and elaborate upon that same theme, but much more effectively. This is a fantastic film called Killer's Kiss. Again, you see it in the title, Killer's Kiss. That differentiation between desire and violence. But he made Killer's Kiss. Again, he had to borrow money from his uncle to finance the film's budget. He was on welfare for the duration of the shoot. This is whenever he was in Central Park, playing chess for money to live. But this film did, more so than Fear and Desire, gain Kubrick a lot more critical attention and praise. He got noticed with this one. People saw this and they were like, "Oh, whoever is doing this is good." The film follows boxer Davy Gordon, who's based off of Walter Cartier, Walter Cartier, the boxer from his other photo shoots. Davy Gordon falls in love with a burlesque dancer, a stripper, Gloria Price, and Davy must fight Gloria's manager, Vinnie Rapallo, for her love. The film expands upon themes merely touched upon in Fear and Desire. The blurred lines between violence and sex, it blurs the lines between violence and sex even further. Gloria's manager sexually assaults her, claiming that he loves her. But Davy fights with and ultimately kills Gloria's manager because he is in love with her. It emphasizes the difference between, he violently assaults this girl, her manager violently assaults this girl because he has a desire for her or because he's just violent, and he's using desire as a cover-up, Those themes are so close that it's difficult to tell which is one and which is the other at times. But the stance that Kubrick makes in this film is there quite definitely is maybe not a definable way, quantifiable way, that you could differentiate the difference between desire and violence. But it's recognizable for sure because we see Gloria's manager as violent, but we see the boxer, David Gordon, as desirable, who literally is somebody who fights for a living, is the one who is very sweet with Gloria and loving and passionate and all that great stuff. We see, like I said, Kubrick's earlier experience informing his photography. He reuses shots and expands upon them. You notice that it's subtly different but improved. Because now he can stage it, he can put that leg exactly where he wants it. But if you look at it, some of these closer up shots are almost indistinguishable from Day of the Fight. He really leans heavily on his photography background for sure. But this is towards the climax of the film. This is the manager and the boxer fighting for Gloria's love, and we literally see them fighting among an army of effigies of Gloria, these images of these naked bodies who praise on what they're doing. They applaud the actions of these men. They fight for her approval, and ultimately in the process destroy her image. What Kubrick tries to say is, like I said, violence, there's a definite differentiation between violence and sex, but that's difficult to draw a line. Are they fighting because they have desire for Gloria, or are they fighting because they just enjoy violence?
Why do they keep on going back to it?
Because it waves. It's like a crowd, saying go. It cheers them on. This idea of their desire for Gloria. The bodies, these images of these mannequins are literally depict, Gloria's silhouette, as a person. But Kubrick was interested in why are such polar opposites as sex and violence so closely related in our minds, spirits, and bodies. It was something, like I said, that Kubrick would continue to explore throughout his career for a long time. The Killer's Kiss got Kubrick some real attention and got him jobs here directing The Killing, which was Kubrick's first big production picture. After the critical praise of Killer's Kiss, Kubrick attracted the attention of up-and-coming producer James Harris, who, teaming up with Kubrick, got them a deal with United Artists to make The Killing. The film was shot with a $320,000 budget, that's $2.94 million today, and was Kubrick's first large-scale production. As such, Kubrick had to work with a crew, including a dedicated cinematographer for the first time, and this would prove to be a really frustrating thing for Kubrick. There's a real famous story of, let's say Kubrick was setting up a lateral tracking shot, of course. The Killing has a very iconic one. But let's say that lateral tracking shot is filming you guys. And Kubrick said, I want the track here, I want the dolly track here, and I want it to go this way. Like this, and I want you to put a 24mm lens on it. And went off and started working with actors. Well, the cinematographer saw that it would make more room for the boom operator to stand on the other side of the camera if he took the dolly track, scooted it back, and put a 50mm lens on it. So it's the same shot because he moved it back and put a tighter lens, but it made more room for the boom operator. And whenever Kubrick came back, he was furious. He was livid. He was like, "I told you to put it right here on a 24mm. I said I wanted it on a 24mm because I wanted it on a 24mm." He was very confident that the decisions that he was making, he had crewed and shot and lit. Killer's Kiss, Fear and Desire, all of his earlier productions on his own by himself. He'd been shooting with lenses and cameras since he was 14 years old. He knew what he wanted, and very often clashed with crews in large scale productions, which is why as soon as Kubrick got notoriety and could hold sway, could hold some authority on set, he would work with smaller and smaller crews until ultimately, like for some scenes in his later films, he was using like 5 crew members in the room, and that is unprecedented on large scale sets. The film follows an ensemble cast led by actors Sterling Hayden, who stage a robbery at a horse race. The film utilizes a non-linear story structure, which would inspire directors like Quentin Tarantino when creating movies like Reservoir Dogs and Steven Soderbergh when creating movies like Ocean's 11. It is this big crime, ensemble cast. There's a lot of really famous people in it. He's working with real famous actors. The film focuses on another theme that Kubrick would continue to explore throughout his career: the intervention of an unstoppable, inescapable spiritual spirit or will, the flippancy of fate. This idea that what we do doesn't really matter because what's going to happen is going to happen was something that fascinated and infuriated Kubrick. Kubrick was meticulously controlled every aspect of his film, and the fact, not the idea, but the fact that just anything might happen and throw that out of whack was he hated it, couldn't stand it. And so that idea in life, I can go through my life trying to direct it towards an idea or a goal or something like that, and I might not meet that goal just because some random thing happened. Kubrick was fascinated by that idea of fate. We see it in Paths of Glory a lot. We see that all these men who die for what? Because some people up higher up the food chain want some political move. The men who are chosen to die out of the many who didn't get out of the trenches. Why are they chosen? Because they drew straws. Why that means that he dies now. That this idea of fate is something that Kubrick would touch on in very, very many of his films. This is kind of a long scene, but this is the ending to the killing. Sterling Hayden here has led this huge bank robbery, and it was this very meticulous plan. It all went according to plan, but what Hayden couldn't deal with was the people, and they start backbiting, and people tell other people, and so everything goes down the tubes, and people die, and it's awful. And so Hayden now grabs the money and runs. He's got $2 million in this suitcase. Grabs the money and runs, and he's trying to get away from these other people that he performed this job with. He's trying to get away from the cops, but he also has the weight of these deaths on his shoulders as this film wraps up. The tension is just absolutely phenomenal. It's just
9 o'clock flight for Boston.
We'll be announcing the on-time departure of this flight very shortly, sir. Do you have any other baggage?
No, it was already checked through this morning. Oh, say, I want to carry that bag with me on the plane, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. It's much too large. You'll have to go check through his baggage.
Oh, now, let's be a little reasonable, huh? You can't tell me that the two of us traveling together are not entitled to one piece of luggage between us.
Sir, we have no objection to one small bag or even 2 small bags.
Well, we don't have anything else. It's already been checked through.
I see. Even though it's getting very close to flight time, I think we can locate the rest of your luggage. You can transfer some of the contents from this one to a smaller one.
No, I'm sorry. That won't work at all. Now, look, let me talk to your supervisor, huh?
All right, I'll be very happy to call him. Mr. Grimes? Mr. Grimes? you come down this way, please? Good evening, sir. What can I do for you?
Good evening. Elaine and I are going through the Boston. The rest of our luggage has already been checked through, and I want to take this bag with me in the cabin, please.
I'm afraid it exceeds the maximum cabin size for flight requirements. Yes, it does look quite a bit too large for passenger compartment. Sir, those are our flight regulations, which are designed for your comfort and safety.
Well, I can't make the trip without it.
You really can't.
Absolutely not.
Well, in that case, I think we can. How
Those
about
are-
it, Brown?
the
I know it's
suitcase
past
is always
cancellation
important.
time, but under the circumstances, I think we might stretch a point, don't you? We'll give you a full rebate in your ticket, sir.
Wait a minute. I don't want a rebate.
Sir, I don't know what else to suggest. It's very close to flight time. There are other passengers waiting. Perhaps the gentleman's worried about the contents of the bag. Is that it? We'd be very happy to insure it. More than happy. We'd be delighted. Just give me its estimated value and tell me what's in it.
No, there's nothing in it. I mean,
$2 million.
personal items, things like that. All right. All right. Check it through.
Passengers
Thank you,
may
sir.
now
I'm sure you'll find the service to your
American
complete
Airlines
satisfaction.
Flight 40, New Englander, DC-7 service to Boston at Gate 8.
Was it right for the airplane? You don't forget that night airplane someday.
And so the inherent randomness of the, of the act it's not that Sterling Hayden is getting his comeuppance. It's not what he deserves. It's not like the universe is out to seek justice and retribution. It highlights and emphasizes the meaninglessness of, what has happened, what's taking place throughout the entire film. The entire film is dedicated towards this goal, and now, because some dog, ran on the tarmac, now everything is undone, everything is meaningless. Kubrick was perplexed by, this idea that our lives are without meaning, that anything can happen at any time to change everything that we've been working towards. Do we really have control over our fate? Do we control circumstances, or do circumstances control us? Again, it's a theme that Kubrick will touch on in very, very many of his films, including Paths of Glory, which that leads us up to. Kubrick made his 3 informational shorts: Day of the Fight, Flying Padre, The Seafarers. He made 3 feature films: Fear and Desire, Killer's Kiss, and The Killing. And the success of The Killing got Kubrick this job here on Paths of Glory. We see Paths of Glory has Kubrick's fingerprints all over it. We've got lateral tracking shots. We've got tracking shots. If you've seen The Shining, you are no stranger to Kubrick's tracking shots. We have this idea of madness, especially in the face of violence, played with. We have these comparisons again drawn between sex and violence, desire and violence. Kubrick, those are ideas that Kubrick would continue to play with throughout the rest of his career. We see them played with very heavily in Paths of Glory. However, Paths of Glory has 2 main focuses, 2 main themes, and those themes are the extremities of class, and the absurdity of war. Both of those themes are themes that Kubrick would go on to develop in later films, especially extremities of class. That was something that Kubrick was always very fascinated by the upper class, the upper echelons, why they do what they do, things like that. This film, that's a huge monumental part of what this film is about. the difference between higher-ranking members of the military and lower-ranking members, you know. But to understand both of these themes and to understand what Kubrick is talking about, what Kubrick is saying about both of these themes, you have to understand Kubrick's thesis statement. I mean, you've written an essay, you know what a thesis statement is, correct? It summarizes what you're going to talk about for the rest of the essay. And Kubrick, most good films have thesis statements. Kubrick's thesis statement in Paths of Glory is real quick. You might miss it if you blink, but literally the entire film hinges upon it. Hinges upon what the statement is. And this is it here. This is Kubrick's thesis for Paths of Glory.
Hello there, soldier. Ready to kill more Germans? That is, everything all right, soldier?
All right. Yes, sir, I'm all right.
Haha, good fella. Are you married, soldier?
Married? Me married?
Yes, have you got a wife?
A wife? Have I got a
Sir?
wife? He's a bit shell-shocked.
I beg your pardon, Sergeant. There is no such thing as shell shock. Have you got a wife, soldier?
My wife? My wife? Yes, I have a wife. I'm never going to see her again. I'm going to be killed.
Get a grip on yourself. You're acting like a coward.
I am a coward, sir.
Snap out of it, soldier. Sergeant, I want you to arrange for the immediate transfer of this baby out of my regiment. I won't have other brave men contaminated by him. Yes, sir.
That's Kubrick's thesis. Kubrick's thesis statement, the entire film will hinge upon it. To better understand the context of the thesis statement, take a look at the scene immediately preceding it. Again, this is kind of long, but you've already seen it before. I just want to refresh you what came just before that thesis statement.
Paul, if there's one man in this army who can do this for me, it's you.
It's out of the question, George. Absolutely out of the question. My division was cut to pieces. What's left of it is in no position to even hold the anthill, let alone take it. I'm sorry, but that's the
Taking the
truth.
anthill is impossible.
Well, Paul, there was something else I wanted to tell you. However, I'm sure that you'll misunderstand my motives in mentioning it.
What was it?
Oh, you'll be bound to misunderstand. However, as your friend, maybe I should tell you.
What are you trying to say, George?
Paul, talk around headquarters is that you are being considered for the 12th Corps.
The 12th Corps?
Yes, and with that another star. Now I've pushed it all I can. 12th Corps needs a fighting general, and you're overdue in that star. We both know that your record is good enough for you to refuse this assignment on the grounds you've stated. No one would question your opinion. It's simply get someone else to do the job. So, you shouldn't let this influence your opinion, Paul.
Oh, I'm sorry, have a cognac?
No, thanks, Paul. Not before dinner.
George, I'm responsible for the lives of 8,000 men. What is my ambition against that? What is my reputation in comparison to that? My men come first of all, George. And those men know it, too.
I know that they do.
You see, George, those men know that I would never let them down.
That goes without saying.
The life of one of those soldiers means more to me than all the stars and decorations and honors in France.
So, you think this attack is absolutely beyond the ability of your men at this time?
I didn't say that, George. Nothing is beyond those men once their fighting spirit is aroused.
Well, Paul, I don't want to push you into it if you think it's ill-advised.
Don't worry, George. You couldn't do that if you tried. Of course, artillery would make an enormous difference. What artillery support can you give me?
Well, I'll see.
What about replacements?
We'll see what we can do, but I feel sure that you get along with what you have.
Might just do it.
Oh, Paul, I knew that it was right to come to you.
The subtext behind Kubrick's thesis statement is, why is this man insane, but this man isn't? Is it because this man is poor and this man is rich? is because this man is a private and this man is a general. What's the difference? What's the distinction between the two? Nothing. Nothing but class. Why, and that line, that arbitrary line, is something that would perplex and fascinate Kubrick for many, many of his films to come. And so, as we watch the rest of the film, we see those extremes emphasized. Kubrick shines light upon those extreme differences. We literally see the general, living in opulence, and while his men live in squalor. And for what reason? I mean, there's no reason. They're both people. They're both just as crazy. They're both just as scared. And that arbitrary division, that extremity of class, the fact that one can so powerfully wield the fate of the other was something that was monumentally unfair in Kubrick's eyes, but also undeniable. Undeniable but unseen. People just accepted it. They were like, well, that's just the way that things are. And Kubrick was like, well, why? Interestingly enough, extremity of class is something that is a huge issue for Jesus throughout the Bible. You didn't think you were going to get scripture in your film lesson today, but you are, because very much of cinema is inherently scriptural, because scripture is inherently human, and humanity is a huge issue, is a huge theme in much of cinema. But we see Jesus focus upon the same extremity of class in Luke 2:21. In Luke 21, who's heard the story of the widow's mite, where she puts her last 2 coins in there, and Jesus says, this woman is so great because she gave everything that she had. You've heard that story, right? I mean, who's heard it in the light that Jesus was like, this woman is so awesome because she did that. Right? That's what Jesus is saying. Yeah? No, it's not. No, it's not. But a lot of people say that it is. No, Jesus' point in this scene, and it's really well emphasized by the scene immediately preceding it. However, in Luke 21, it reads 1-4, Jesus looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the offering box, and he saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. And he said, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them, for they have contributed out of their abundance. But she, out of her poverty, put in all that she had to live on. The scene immediately preceding it, and it is complicated, so tune in. This is another story that you probably heard, but you probably haven't heard it in the scriptural and historical contexts. This is Jesus. He's on the steps to the temple. He's preaching to the people. He's got a huge crowd around him. The scribes and Pharisees don't like it. They send people in. They trip him up with a hard, tough question. And they ask him one of the hardest questions. How any human could possibly answer the question as deftly as Jesus does is beyond me. But they asked him, Teacher, we know that you teach rightly, and show no partiality, but truly teach the way of God. Is it lawful for us to give tribute to Caesar or not? But he perceived their craftiness and said to them, show me a denarius. Whose likeness and inscription does it have? They said, Caesar's. He said to them, then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and render to God the things that are God's. And they were not able, in the presence of the people, to catch him in what he said, but marveling at his answer, they became silent. Not only is it the deftest answer imaginable, because the question is absolutely scathing. They ask, Jesus, should we pay taxes to the occupying force that oppresses us every day, or should we not? And if he says no, don't pay taxes to the Romans, then the Romans are going to come in there and they're going to kill Jesus. because he's defying Roman rule. If he says, yes, pay taxes to the Romans, then the Jews are going to come in there and kill Jesus because they don't like people who, help Roman oppressors. So either way, it's a lose-lose situation until Jesus says, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's because God is the one that put you in this situation. Follow God, not man. Follow man because God leads you that way. It's absolutely a phenomenal question, but it's a scathing indictment of the upper class, of the same thing that Kubrick is frustrated with, the power that the upper class lords over the lower class. Jesus will emphasize the same thing here. This is a denarius. It's got the image of Caesar on it. And Caesar in the Roman Empire was a quasi-divine figure. He was like half man, half God. And so his image on the coin was not allowed on the Temple Mount because it was an idol. It was bringing the image of a false god into the temple. And so before people could come onto the temple, what did Jesus drive out? He makes a whip and he drives out the people who are selling goats and sheep and stuff there. Why did they sell that stuff there?
Because they could probably pay less.
For sacrifices. You go to the temple, you make a sacrifice. If you're coming all the way 200 miles from Galilee, you're not going to bring your 3 sheep with you. You walk by yourself, you go buy one at the temple, you make a sacrifice there. Whenever you buy one at the temple, what are you going to buy it with? Because you can't bring your denarius with you.
Trade.
You've got to trade, you've got to exchange your denarius for temple shekels. So let's say at the temple, this sheep costs 2 denarii normally. Well, whenever you trade that in, 2 denarii is worth 20 temple shekels. So 1 denarius is worth 10 temple shekels. However, you don't know that. You don't know how much a sheep is going to cost. You don't know what the exchange rate is between denarii and temple shekels. So you show up at the front door, you go to the money changers at the desk, you give them 2 denarii, and he gives you 15 temple shekels. Takes the other 5, keeps them for himself, skims off the top with every person that walks in there, and walks away with, a pretty penny by the end of the day. And people understood that this was a common practice. People were frustrated by this practice. They hated having to exchange their money, which is why Jesus drives out the people that he drives out are the people selling goats and sheep and stuff. But he's also driving out the money changers. You'll hear that title used of many people, money changers. And it's these people who exchange denarii for temple shekels. So, whenever Jesus says, show me a denarius, and the Pharisee at the temple pulls the denarius out of his pocket and flips to Jesus, what's the problem there?
He's breaking the law.
Denarii aren't allowed on the temple. So the upper class, the very rules that they use to subjugate and swindle the lower class, they don't follow themselves. They're corrupt. And Jesus takes that veil off of the upper class, shows them for what they are, people. They're flawed, messed up people just like everybody else is. And so, whatever we see, all these people giving out of their abundance, but they pressure and swindle the lower class out of their money. Whenever this poor woman puts in the 2 copper coins, the money that she's going to use to buy bread tomorrow, she puts that into the Temple Mount because the upper class is telling her that that's what she's supposed to do. Jesus, he might have some measure of admiration for her, but his problem is with the upper class, is with the Pharisees, who are telling her, you got to give to God everything, otherwise you won't be blessed. You got to give to God everything that you have. And while they themselves give out of their abundance, they got $100, they give $10. That's a lot of money, sure. But it's 10% of what they have. She gives $2, that's everything that she has. And so yes, she gives more than they do. And he's not saying that in a good way, he's saying that in a bad way. This statement is not praise of the lower class of this poor woman. It's a scathing indictment of the upper class. The same way that Kubrick has a real problem with that differentiation between the upper class and the lower class. The second main theme that's focused upon in Paths of Glory is this idea of the absurdity of war. And if this guy looked familiar to you, which he probably didn't, but that's okay. If he looks familiar to you, it's because he's the bartender from The Shining. If you've seen The Shining. Yeah, same actor. But again, you have to understand Kubrick's first theme of... Yeah, that's him. You have to understand Kubrick's first theme of the extremities of class before you can really understand the absurdity of war, because now this extremity of class, the fact that this man is no different from this man, why now whenever these people are scared to charge into war, is this man the one that can decide that these people have to die? You know, this idea that these men are dying, this idea that, how many Germans do we see in the movie? None. We see the enemy not once. Because the enemy is the upper class. The enemy are these people who are killing the lower class for no other reason than they're not the lower class. Yeah.
If he wants them, if he's trying to kill them because they don't go to war, why, like when he was talking to the other person, he was like, I love my soldiers more than any star that I can get.
Because he's lying. He's crazy. He's mad. He doesn't care anything about his soldiers. He cares about looking good in front of his boss, which is crazier than the shell shock guy in the trench. Because looking for good in front of his boss means that people are going to die.
It's cognitive dissonance.
Exactly. And that's exactly, cognitive dissonance is exactly what it is. That's the definition of what Kubrick will, that's the way that Kubrick will define insanity, is loss of perspective. Throughout all of his films, if you watch, these people lose an idea of what's happening around them. They stop relating to the events that are happening. Like in The Shining. But, so Kubrick defines both of these people as insane, but for some reason this one gets to kill the other. This absurd idea that the kings get to sit in their lofty tower while the pawns go and, die on the battlefield was something that was insane to Kubrick. And then this idea, how many Germans do we see in the film? None. So the enemy becomes these people who are trying to kill these guys, our protagonists. That's the enemy, that's the antagonist, is us. And so what Kubrick is trying to say is, whenever we go out and we kill Germans on the battlefield, if the upper class and the lower class are no different, are Germans and French any different? And so, whenever we go out and we kill Germans on the battlefield, what are we doing? We're killing our own men. We kill people, members of our own race, of our own species. Kubrick points out the absurdity between class. He points out the absurdity between nationality, and in doing so, condemns the act of war because it becomes something that is inherently violent for no reason other than these people who happen to live in this place get more stuff than these people do. Why? These ideas, the absurdity of war and the extremity of class are the things that are focused throughout Paths of Glory very strongly. They are the two main pillars of the film, the two main things that Kubrick is going to focus on. We see this absurdity and extremity drive our men to madness, to insanity. They're whipped up into a frenzy in the midst of this war, completely violent. All their baser violent tendencies are exposed, but then their sanity is revealed. They're brought back to sanity by beauty, by love, by grief in the face of injustice. All these are qualities of humanity. And so what Kubrick says, Kubrick is the kind of person that would fight war with art, who would say fight injustice with painting. This person who, the only way that we can truly understand to stop fighting and stop killing each other is to see each other as people. That's the thing that we have in common is our humanity. And those ideas are very Christian. A long time ago, whenever I was a filmmaker, that was, I mean, I guess I'm still technically a filmmaker, but whatever. Whenever I was in California making movies, that was my main focus, was humanity was the thing that we all shared. And I defined humanity as good and bad. But, arguably the good parts of humanity were more preferable to the bad parts. And so I would look at a film like Paths of Glory and I would say, the best of us is what binds us together, not the worst of us. The worst of us is what tears us apart. And I would say that wrongly today. Now I understand those ideas: beauty, love, grief in the face of injustice, are not ideas that humanity is capable of accomplishing on its own. Those are only ideas that can be accomplished through Christ. We only have true humanity whenever humanity is rectified to its original design. Kubrick's film is open-ended. There's no solution. But the end to the violence comes by regarding not just humanity, but the best of humanity. You could easily say that all of the aspects of this woman represented are represented in Christ. And those ideas are inherently Christian. Filmmaking, you can take any film, you can take any movie, any critically acclaimed film, any movie that you enjoy, and interpret it through a Christian lens like that. Kubrick wasn't a Christian. Kubrick wasn't trying to identify with Christianity with Paths of Glory, but many of his ideas, the ideas that he focuses on, are synonymous and work in from a Christian viewpoint. Kubrick would go on from Paths of Glory. Kirk Douglas would enjoy working with him, even though they were horrible at working together. They hated each other. They admired each other. They just didn't get along at all. But Kirk Douglas was a producer as well as an actor, and he produced a film called Spartacus, which is fantastic, but is probably the least Kubrickian film that Kubrick has ever done. It doesn't look like Kubrick at all.
No, it doesn't.
Because Kirk Douglas was the executive producer of the movie. And so Kirk Douglas had the final say of what gets to be done and what doesn't, and not Stanley. And that process was torturous for Stanley, but he, once he got through it, he told his wife, who is this woman, by the way, his third wife. This would be his wife for the rest of his life, though. He would get divorced twice, but this woman he would marry after this film, a few months after this film, and he would tell her, after Spartacus, I put in my time, I ate my vegetables, now I can do what I want to do. I've made myself a name, I'm a director now, and now I can make films that I want to make, and he went on to make great films. The next film he would make after Spartacus is Lolita, again, biting, satirical, gorgeous dark comedy film. Then Dr. Strangelove, which is hilarious. Great dark comedy, and then after that, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and would create more and more to come as he went on, and would unfortunately die well before his time. It took him, like I said before, like 10 years to make a movie. It would take him a long time to get a film produced. Aryan Papers was a movie that never got made, but you were talking about Schindler's List earlier. He was making Aryan Papers, which was about the extermination of the Jews. As a Jewish person, Stanley felt a kind of this certain
Connection?
not connection.
Responsibility.
Yeah, to communicate that story of what happened, to elucidate, to expand upon. It was his obligation as a Jew to focus upon what happened in World War II, and it made him horribly depressed. He hated working through it. It was a process he grieved every day for people who died. He felt tremendously love, passion, grief, loss, tremendously, and he went into a stupor of depression for a while. But he worked on that film for more than a year. in pre-production, scouting location, getting together with production designers, costume designers, lighting technicians, like I said, location scouts. He did a ton of work for that movie. And then Schindler's List came out, and he was like, well, Schindler's List told that story that I was trying to tell well enough to where I would just look like I'm copying it if I made area papers. And so he just threw it away. He worked on it for more than a year, and then just didn't make it. Napoleon, the greatest film that never was. Napoleon was going to be fantastic. He worked on Napoleon, I think, for 3 years, pre-production, and it didn't get made. They had a contract to make it, and then another company made this movie called Waterloo, which was about Napoleon, and it tanked at the box office. And so the company that was funding Napoleon for Stanley Kubrick was like, well, moviegoers don't want to watch movies about Napoleon. And so they pulled his funding, and he couldn't make it. And it is a crime because that script is phenomenal. And he was gonna cast Jack Nicholson as Napoleon, and it was gonna
that would have been perfect.
it would have been so good. It was gonna be such a great movie.
But there you go, where it comes to Hollywood cannibalizing itself and doubling up on movies and things of that nature.
Yeah, questions or concerns about Kubrick?
He died in the 90s, right?
Yeah, 99.
And what was his last movie that was actually made?
Eyes Wide Shut, which you're not allowed to watch until you're 21. Yes.
That's a good.
Yeah.
I'm gonna shut them when they're asking the question. They're not.
Yeah, Eyes Wide Shut, which is absolutely phenomenal, but deals with this idea of not so much sex and violence, but sex and secrecy. Lies that we tell to our marital partners or spouses.
I know that movie.
So good.
It's like desire and deceit.
Yeah. You just are not allowed to watch this through 21.
Yes. That is a good.
Anyways, other questions? Questions, concerns about Kubrick? Nothing?
How did he, like, I imagine that, like, that it took a lot of time to come up with these little aspects to tell a story without being preachy and all that.
Yeah.
And, I mean, like, how would he do that?
That's why he's a genius. I mean, I can't do it. I can't tell you how to do it. He thought that way. He looked at a scene and said, this is the story that I can tell through this, and this is how I can do it. It's what makes you, the unique filmmaker that you are. You're going to see a scene, and you're going to think of a way to do it and what to emphasize in it that nobody else can see. And that's why varied filmmakers, you have the difference between Stanley Kubrick and Oliver Stone and Francis Ford Coppola and Steven Spielberg, are such radically different filmmakers, but make films that talk volumes about. Oliver Stone would make Platoon, and Francis Ford Coppola would make Apocalypse Now, and Kubrick would make Full Metal Jacket. All three of those films are about the Vietnam War, but none of them say nearly the remote, anything close to what the others say about that conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Platoon is one of my favorite movies.
Fantastic film.
And
I love watching.
Yeah, I was gonna say it was kind of interesting. You were talking about how Kubrick, how he communicates. Like, you learn all you need to know about the general's character from the first two scenes he's in, and he doesn't have to say a whole lot in that second one. I mean, but just in those two instances, and it's like, without it being in your face, you don't have a narrator talking.
Oh yeah.
Or some other character tell you how the general is. Mm-hmm. Like you see so often in like stuff today, like people just
right there on his
right
face.
in your face,
yeah.
Like some fourth wall break, or a character just going, "Oh yeah, he's just a jerk," and he's forceful, whatever, or explain, or it's just like you learn everything you know by natural dialogue.
Right.
Like, and that was one thing about like Kubrick movies that I love. It doesn't seem like anything's wasted for some other purpose. It's like, not that some conversations are for expanding the plot and then some are for explaining characters. It's like you get everything in every conversation.
Right.
also like the way he was walking through those trenches and the explosions in the background. When I first watched it, I didn't think it mattered very much, but then when you showed the clip again, I was thinking it's like just the like he was walking in with the picture of condescension on his face, and as he was walking, and then it's like the explosion was like a little bit of taste of what the lower class was had to experience.
This is a foreign environment for him.
Yeah, and he flinches like noticeably.
Yeah.
And then it's like, but while everybody around him doesn't, and he just keeps on walking, and then just that
distance.
Like, and how he was like he showed fear while the lower class did not. Yeah. That type of.
Yeah, for sure. And